Father's Promise by Donnalynn Hess. Chapter 23, Joseph's Return. May 1944. The discretion of a man deferreth his anger, and it is his glory to pass over a transgression. Proverbs 19:11. The months they had spent at Anna's had been so peaceful that it almost seemed as if the war had ceased. Rudy loved his work on the farm, and he felt sure that with his Swedish looks he did not arouse the suspicions of those few people who passed by now and then. Also, Ingrid was doing much better. Under Anna's care, she not only grew healthier, but also learned to read and write. Her drawing improved too, but despite Anna's and Rudy's urgings, Ingrid would use nothing but bark pencils and smooth stones for her art, so Rudy continued collecting them for her each morning. Sasha, Ingrid's constant companion, had also grown. She was no longer a pudgy ball of fur, but rather a strong, muscular dog. Although she was fierce enough to terrify any passing stranger, she permitted Ingrid to subject her to all kinds of playful indignities without slightest objection. She was completely submissive to Ingrid. One incident, however, showed Rudy that Sasha's submission did not extend to other members of the household. As usual, Rudy had gotten up at dawn, milked the cows, then taken them out into the fields to graze. After mid-morning, Ingrid and Sasha joined him. Since the cows needed to graze at least 2 more hours, Rudy decided that he would teach Sasha some tricks while they waited. Teaching her to sit seemed to be a good place to start. He had a rope with him that he used as a kind of leash whenever he needed to coax a stubborn cow into moving. Taking his rope, he tied it loosely around Sasha's neck. He then gave the leash a slight upward tug, and at the same time he gently pushed down on her hindquarters. "Sit," he said. She looked up at him dumbly. He decided to try another tack. "Sit," he repeated. And this time, as he spoke, he not only gave the leash an upward tug, but also tried to gently but firmly buckle Sasha's hind legs under her. Still she stood firm, and her innocent appearance looked less convincing. "Come on, Sasha," Rudy urged. "You're supposed to be a smart dog." For the next hour or two he tried patiently to get her to master the simple task. At last, he left off pleading and resorting to yelling. He even tried bribing her with some of the cheese Anna had given him for a snack, but nothing seemed to work. Ingrid had been carefully watching the whole charade. "Sorry, Ingrid," Rudy finally said, slipping the rope off Sasha's neck. "Your dog may be pretty, but she's just too dumb to train. Come on, let's get these cows rounded up and head back to the cottage for lunch." After several steps, however, he realized that Ingrid was not following him. He turned to see her standing over Sasha. Her look was stern, so stern, in fact, that Sasha laid down flat on the ground, her head on her forepaws. Rudy almost burst out laughing as he saw Sasha staring mournfully up at Ingrid. Ingrid stood several moments, hands on hips, glaring down at the dog. During this reprimand, the only movement poor Sasha made was to let one ear point upward. But as soon as Ingrid shook her finger, the ear immediately resumed its former position, flat against the husky's head. Rudy was almost about to herd the cows toward the cottage again when Ingrid changed her tactic. She ceased her reprimand and smiled down at Sasha. Such approval put Sasha on her feet in a moment. Then Ingrid patted Sasha's hindquarters. To Rudy's astonishment, the silly dog not only sat down, but also remained as still as a statue until Ingrid motioned for her to follow. From that time on, Rudy knew that he had no choice but to leave Sasha's training to Ingrid. Rudy had just finished getting the cows back to the barn when he saw a stranger approaching. Sasha left Ingrid's side to rush to the edge of the road. Taking a threatening stance, she She bared her teeth and dared the stranger to enter without welcome. Rudy ran to the dog and took her by the scuff of the neck. Anna had come out to see what was causing the commotion, and she and Ingrid now stood waiting in the doorway, holding the dog tightly. Rudy strained to see the stranger in the distance. Whoever it was seemed to ignore Sasha's warning and continued on at a steady pace. As the man drew near, Rudy began to sense that there was something familiar in the stranger's gait, but he walked with his head down, and Rudy could not see his face. Finally, he looked up. It was Joseph. He passed Rudy without speaking. Walking straight up to Anna, he said, "I'm hungry. Fix me something to eat." "You will eat with the rest of us," she said, and that will not be until the chores are finished. He glared but did not contradict her. They both disappeared into the cottage. Rudy had not liked the tone of his voice. Neither had Sasha. It now took all of his strength to hold her back. "It's all right, Sasha," he said, comforting her, though he did not speak with much assurance. Joseph's return completely altered the atmosphere of the house. Over the next few days, Anna became solemn. Ingrid was inattentive to her lessons, and Sasha became more like a caged wolf than a pet. She would not even play with Ingrid. All her attention was given to watching Joseph. When he was in the house, she prowled about, watching his every move. When he went outside, she followed, and even when he lay down to sleep, she lay down a few feet from him, barely allowing her head to drop down and rest on her forepaws. Rudy had determined to keep his distance. He had no desire to fight, although after seeing Joseph, Rudy agreed with Anna. In a fight, Rudy would definitely have the upper hand. It was a comforting thought. Rudy's present concern was that such odds would not be enough to confine Joseph's hatred indefinitely. He was right. "Well," said Joseph one evening as they all sat down to dinner, "I think I'll be heading back to Warsaw in the morning. I'm sure you're all grieved to hear that." "We'd be glad to have your company, Joseph, if you worked a little more at being pleasant," said Anna. "As I've told you before, it's not you I object to, it's your sour disposition." "I would think you'd be better off here anyway," said Rudy, trying to be pleasant. "I have heard that there is a great deal of unrest in the city." "Not any longer," said Joseph. "Besides," he continued, casting a glance at Ingrid and Rudy, "I think I may have some information to give the authorities there." Rudy's anger flared, but he tried to give no visible indication of it. "I hope," said Anna firmly, "you're not thinking of trying to stir up trouble here." "Here, Aunt Anna?" Joseph said. "Why should there be trouble here? It's not unusual for farmers to allow little orphan Polish boys to help them with their chores, and some would think you very noble to take on an orphan girl who could be absolutely no use at all." "No," said Rudy. It's not any more unusual to hire little Polish boys on the farm than it is to allow little Polish farm boys to go into the city and play spy." Anna put down her fork. "There will be no arguing at my table," she said. "I'm sorry," said Rudy. Anna waited for Joseph's apology. It did not come. Rudy was tempted to pick him up by the scuff of the neck and shake it out of him, but out of deference to Anna, he went on with his meal. Joseph continued the conversation as if there had been no disagreement. "Tell me, Rudy," he said, "how do you, being way out here, hear that there is unrest in Warsaw?" "We do some trading with the other farmers," said Rudy sullenly. "The farmers speak of it." He changed his strategy. "They also say that the Germans are no longer winning the war. Not only do they face unrest here in Warsaw, but they are also losing ground abroad. Now that the Americans have joined the Allies are regaining strength. The Germans, on the other hand, are said to be losing on nearly every field, especially in Russia. Don't believe everything you hear, Joseph snarled. Don't the Germans still have control of Denmark, Norway, and all the Low Countries? Not to mention France? Those facts hardly indicate their weakness. And as far as this unrest in Warsaw, I can guarantee that an uprising would be no more successful than the one staged last year. There was one last year? Asked Rudy, unable to conceal his interest. Oh yes, said Joseph. I'm surprised you did not hear of that one. It was started by the Jews. Joseph watched Rudy's reaction to his comments carefully, and he was glad to see that the news obviously troubled him. A Jewish uprising? Rudy repeated, his thoughts going immediately to Selleck and his parents. Yes, that's what I said, Joseph said acidly. Unfortunately, several German soldiers were killed. How many Jews? Demanded Rudy. Jews? Said Joseph. Oh, I imagine there were hundreds. Those who were not killed were sent off to camps. But what should that matter? He asked, smiling. I would say a great deal, said Rudy, for Scripture says that those who touch the Jews touch the apple of God's eye. Rather a rotten apple, I should say, said Joseph. A few Jews more or less don't matter. Anna started to light into Joseph, but Rudy beat her to it. To someone with little sense as you have, I don't imagine that the number of Jews killed would be of any interest, said Rudy. He then tried to regain his composure, for he wanted more information. But since the Germans, in your opinion, are, shall we say, worth more, perhaps you could recall the names of some of the soldiers killed. Yes, I can, said Joseph. There was a man named Schmidt, another man named Heinrich, and yes, a rather important officer named Mendy. Joseph noted Rudy's reaction to the mention of Mendy. You knew one of them? I've heard of Mendy, Rudy said. A great man, said Joseph, trying once again to goad Rudy into fighting. Rudy made no reply to Joseph's comment. That's enough, Joseph, said Anna. Why are you so upset, Anna? Rudy wants information, and I'm giving it to him, he said. Then turning back to Rudy, he added, I've heard of the things Mendy did to the Jews, said Joseph. He was quite creative. Would you like to hear some of his techniques of interrogation? No, said Rudy, before Anna could say more. To be quite frank, Joseph, your conversation bores me. You don't have any opinions of your own. As a matter of fact, I've never heard you make one original comment. You only repeat what you have read in propaganda posters. Now Joseph grew angry. What are you insinuating? I'm not insinuating anything, said Rudy. I'm simply telling you that I enjoy talking to people, not parrots. So if you don't mind, why don't you let Anna talk a while? The insult went home, and Joseph, in frustration, could think of nothing to say. Seeing that Rudy had the best end of the argument, Anna seemed content. Rudy pretended not to see either Joseph's anger or Anna's approval. He simply waited for Joseph to make his usual raging exit and leave them in peace for the night. Instead of storming out, Joseph jumped up from his seat and reached for Rudy. In doing so, he made a serious mistake, for he had to lean over Ingrid to get to Rudy. Without warning, Sasha leaped from her resting place. The force of her body knocked Joseph from his feet, and in a moment Sasha was on him. Rudy, fearing that Sasha would kill Joseph, nearly jumped over the table to take Sasha by the neck. It took all his strength to hold her. Get her off me, Joseph cried. Get her off! Rudy had never seen such fear, and as he looked down at his enemy, he lost all desire for vengeance. Still, he did not think it was wise to let Joseph know his feelings. It was a good chance to teach him a lesson. Thus Rudy stood a moment more, letting Joseph feel the dog's breath against his cheek and see her bare teeth at close range. It is a frightening thing to have a dog attack you, isn't it? I hear that Mendy liked to set dogs on the Jews, one of his techniques you were talking about. It is fortunate for you that I'm not the kind of person he was. Having made his point, Rudy pulled Sasha back. Joseph got up trembling and turned to his aunt. I'll be leaving in the morning, so have good breakfast for me. Then turning to Rudy, he added, I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Make sure you keep that dog away from me. And he stomped out and slammed the door. I like his sense of gratitude, said Rudy to Anna, trying to lighten things up a bit. Thank you, Rudy, she said quietly. You're a good boy. A good boy.